Mi gente, hello and welcome to Kica's Corner. My name is Kica Matos and I'm your host. On this show, we talk about our community and the city and our world, but always, always, always we talk about it through a social justice lens. Last November, New Haveners flocked to the polls to vote during a presidential election that was probably one of the most important ones in our lifetimes. For many of us, it felt like a decision that would really determine the future of our democracy. This year, we are being asked to determine the future of our city. And by that, I mean we have mayoral elections coming up. On September 4th, New Haveners are going to be casting the vote for mayor in the primaries. And then on the 2nd of November, people will vote in the general election. So far, there are three registered candidates: Justin Elliker, AC Torres, and Karen DuBois-Walton. In the studio with me today, I'm happy to say we have one of those candidates, Karen DuBois-Walton. In the spirit of full disclosure, I will say that Karen was a colleague of mine. We were both deputy mayors in City Hall at the same time. And she is also a neighbor of mine. She and I live on the same street in Fairhaven. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hey, neighbor. It's great to be here.
Good to see you. I usually see you on the street, but it's nice to see you on the screen.
Yeah.
So Karen, talk to us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up and how did you end up in New Haven?
Oh, well, college brought me to New Haven. I was born in New York and moved around New York State quite a bit as my parents' jobs moved. We ended up in Western New York in a small town south of Buffalo, New York. And I spent from about fifth grade through college, through high school graduation in that area. And, I'm a product of parents that were born my dad was born in 1929 and my mom in 1935. So they came up at a time where they saw what was possible for them totally transform, right? Civil rights era folks. My mom grew up in the segregated South. She grew up in New Orleans. My dad was a Northerner. So what was possible, I just really shifted in really tremendous ways. And out of that, I was raised sort of with this sense of don't just be limited by what's in front of us today, but like have that big dream and vision of how things should be. And have a really clear eye on the distinction between what's in front of us and what we should be having as a society, and then work really hard to kind of change those things. That was sort of embedded in me. I saw my dad broke barriers. He was the first African American and the first non-medical person appointed to head the state psychiatric hospital that he ran. And it was sort of that spirit of their stories of civil rights and their own barrier breaking sort of efforts that was grounded in me, but also a real sense of, you don't get any place alone. You open the door for others, you create opportunity for other people, you give people a fair shot, and just solid set of values, I think, that was instilled in me. And they helped me get to the city, right? So I came in 85 as an undergrad and loved New Haven. I fell in love with this place. And for a lot of reasons, I was looking for a community, a sense of community. And so I got off campus a lot. I met a lot of people, made a lot of friends. My best friend is somebody that I met in New Haven from my getting off campus. And she's the godmother of my children. And that I just stuck. I did get my PhD in Boston and I came right back here as soon as possible and started my professional life in New Haven. And we do live up the street from you, my husband, Kevin, varsity boys basketball coach at Cross, and our two sons, Kevin and Caleb.
Yeah. You have your kids are, I think one of them is in college. Is that right?
I have one who's finished and one who's in now. Yep. Wow. Yep. They are now 25 and 21.
Now you have a hyphenated last name. And one of the things people ask, and I'm sure you're aware, people tell you, they say, oh, DuBois-Walton, is she somehow related to W.E.B. Du Bois? So I feel compelled to ask you that question and get it out in the public.
Is good. So it's so funny because somehow a rumor got started that he was my great grandfather, and that got in print somewhere. And I was like, where did this come from? So it's nothing really that direct. But I am such a proud carrier of the Du Bois name. I cannot claim to be a direct descendant in terms of great grandfathership. But I'm really proud to carry the name. And it is one of the reasons my husband was like hyphenated. It was a little new for him. But when he understood, there are no boys in my generation. I have a sister, I have female cousins. And so it did feel important to keep the name alive.
I want to talk about your career trajectory. You have a PhD, and instead of making the decision to, comfortably sit inside an ivory tower admiring problems, you have dedicated your life to public service. You have worked for the Department of Health and Addiction Services. You worked at Yale Child Studies Center. You were deputy mayor for the city. And you are executive director of Elm City Communities / Housing Authority for the city of New Haven. Why did you pick the road less traveled?
Yeah, I mean, I was drawn to psychology because I'm drawn to people. I love people. I was just talking to somebody on the phone last night, and in the middle of the conversation, he stopped me and he was like, "I got to tell you, you're a really good listener." And that's what drew me to psychology. I love people. I love people's story. I love to hear what makes people tick. I've been a very keen observer of people and dynamics since I was little. And so I knew that that's what I was sort of naturally drawn to. And both my parents were civil servants. They worked in government and worked in the mental health field. So I was had both of those in my genes and in my experience from early on. But when I started practicing, and I started I came back here and started working in a partnership that put clinicians in partnership with law enforcement to go out and respond to kids and families that were experiencing really significant traumas. And it's incredibly difficult and powerful and rewarding work, but it also was really frustrating for me to feel like we were feeling at the end of a series of really traumatic poverty, racism, lack of opportunity, and some trauma piled on top of that. And I wanted to be in a position that could actually make some structural and systemic changes so that we weren't just helping people heal from society, but that we were actually helping to build communities that were empowering and that people didn't just have to survive, but could actually thrive. And so work in city government gave me a lot of experience about the power of local government to make really significant impact in people's lives. And for the past 14 years with the Housing Authority, the work has been about transforming communities and making communities much better places in terms of the physical infrastructure, the homes that we were building for people, but also knowing that community is about how we create connection and how we help people get access to what any of us need, right? Mm-hmm. Access to joy and pleasure and fun, access to fulfilling work, access to other people, community support systems, connection to nature, right? Places that we feel safe coming outside. And so in a lot of ways, the psychology is still very much, that training is very much at play in the work that I do today, because it's about how do we make spaces and experiences that will help people thrive.
So we are coming out of the tail end of a really traumatic experience as a nation and actually globally because of this pandemic. And one of the phenomena is we've seen a number of public officials, particularly local mayors, saying, okay, I'm done. I'm not running again. Right? This was really hard. And yet you're jumping into it, right? You're one of those people who said, okay, this is now part of my journey now is to run for mayor. So you are running into a particularly challenging moment. So talk to us about why you decided to run for mayor.
Yeah, I can't sit on the sidelines when I feel an urgent need for in a connection to something I can offer to help in that moment. And this feels like one of those moments. Been around and involved in city government for a long time, but there's a moment right here that I think we cannot let pass, where things have aligned, and it has been an incredibly difficult couple of years around the health pandemic, layered on top of an incredibly difficult 400 years of inequity and unfairness and discriminatory actions in the community. That right now there's a moment of real awakening and focusing that you see happening in corporate boardrooms, you see it happen in nonprofits, you see it happening in grassroots organizations, you see it happening in government. And when there's that sort of opportunity and alignment, we cannot miss the opportunity to really move forward the kind of transformational change that has to happen. And so I felt really called, and there are a few things that I felt really called around. One has been in the midst of this pandemic, at a time when we really needed to be making sure that our kids had everything that they needed through a public school system. I was seeing an inability for the person that we had elected to lead the city to lead in a way that recognizes the power of that office, not to dominate and overtake the Board of Education, but to provide leadership and to use and to leverage what comes with running City Hall, right? And to use that in a way to really build consensus and leadership. And this was the only city in the whole state that did not open for an in-person option in September. And too many of our children suffered as a result of that. Now some young people did well, did fine in remote and virtual, but we can't focus just on those who made it well, right? That's what we've done as a country for too long. We've left millions behind and focused on the exceptional story of what was working and overlooked all those people that wasn't working. And I think for too many of our young people, they were not well served. You know, Kevin, I mentioned he's a basketball coach, right? The work he does with his players is so much about what he does on the court and teaching them the love of the game and all that. But the bigger part of what he does is all that stuff that has nothing to do with the game time, but is the relationship and the mentorship and the time spent together and the advice and the guidance and that coaches do, that educators do, the time kids spent with their peers, all that was so disrupted. So seeing that and knowing that I had the experience and to understand sort of how to bring people together and to have a vision and get things done was one moment that really called me to think this is my moment. And the other really seminal moment was a night in front of 1 Union Avenue, the police headquarters in New Haven, in the wake of a Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery march back in June last year. Thousands of people came out. You were out there, right? Thousands of people were out there that evening demanding change. And rather than our mayor coming down and engaging with the community, he literally made the community wait for 7 hours before he would even come down and engage. And in that moment, it was so clear to me that what we need to move us forward in really equitable and really transformative kind of change was missing in the leadership that we had at that moment. And so I think as we're going to address what we need in our public schools to make sure our kids are well prepared, if we're going to address what we need to have community safety, we've got unconscionable levels of crime and violent crime and property level crime right now. And if we're really going to create a climate for economic growth that's going to include and offer opportunity for all of us, we have to have the right leadership at this time.
So flesh out your vision a little bit more. You talked about public education, you talked about public safety, you talked about economic development. Share with us your broad vision of what you would do as mayor.
Absolutely. Starting with public education, we just put out our platform around public education yesterday. So hopefully everyone will take a chance to see that. First and foremost, our kids need a 5-day-a-week in-person education. And so we have to be preparing what we need to do now to rebuild trust and confidence so that educators know that they can come back into the building safely, so that parents trust that they can send their students and students can come back to school feeling well prepared. We need to get them back in. So that's one of the key things. And I think we have to reestablish a sense of good governance and leadership at the Board of Education so that our superintendents feel supported and can move our decisions forward. We got to start our young people off well so that they are ready for success coming in. And we are announcing a pre-promise program that's modeled off of the New Haven Promise. the scholarship program that has helped our young people get to the next level in terms of college. Well, we should make a similar commitment to our littlest ones and ensure that everybody has access to high quality early care and education. And we can do that through a pre-promise program. And we're also excited about creating pathways to success. So college is certainly a pathway. We need to be preparing as many of our young people for college as for whom that's their dream, but it can't be our only pathway. And so really robust pathway programs into our public safety careers, into biotech and healthcare, into entrepreneurship. So a lot of exciting things in the education platform. Around community policing, the mayor cut $2 million from the police budget, but didn't invest that in things that would help the community not have more opportunity and not turn to crime and property or violent crime, but instead used it to fill a hole in the budget. We need to be investing in those root causes. The real inequities that that have been highlighted in this moment need to be a place of investment, but we also need to refocus what the department's doing around staffing and deployment. We need to solve crime. There's a ridiculously low homicide clearance rate in this city. It leaves a sense of lawlessness and lack of accountability, and families grieving without any sense of closure. So we need to do these things with our law enforcement police department. And economic growth. Yale and our institutional partners absolutely must pay their fair share, but that's not just a cash deposit into the general fund. It's the partnership and investment in things that are going to create economic growth in our community. And economic growth is going to allow for home ownership opportunities in Fairhaven, in Dixwell, in New Hallville, in the Hill neighborhoods, for investment that's going to create entrepreneurship and small business development, so that we're not just relying year to year on, are we going to get enough from the state? Are we going to get enough from the university? But we're actually growing things so that our families have growing wealth and sustainable wealth in our community.
Let's speak to the question of Yale. I want to just flesh it out a little bit more. As of June of last year, Yale's endowment was $31.2 billion. Yale feels like a fortress, right? Wealthy and powerful, and really inaccessible and unwelcoming to people who look like you and me, to people who are working class, for people who are barely struggling to survive. It's not a space that makes us feel welcome. And it also doesn't appear to be accountable to the city. I don't see much of when you and I worked City Hall, I remember there was a relationship between the then Mayor John DeStefano and the then President Rick Levin. And it feels like there is no joint leadership and that we're not holding Yale accountable. I want to quote from a Yale Respect New Haven website that says, this year, Yale University and Yale New Haven Hospital are receiving a combined tax break of over $157 million for its New Haven tax-exempt real estate, even after accounting for their voluntary payments and the state college and hospital pilot payment that New Haven receives. If you were elected as mayor, what will your goals and visions be related to Yale? How would you hold Yale accountable? And how would you see a healthy relationship defined? How would you define a healthy relationship between you and the president of the university?
Right, a healthy relationship requires some awareness of the mutual benefit and mutual good of each party, right? And Yale's not going to pack up and go anywhere. That Yale is rooted in this community and must be accountable to this community. And Yale's desires to grow and attract students that they need to survive and thrive, the faculty that they need, requires that this city be a thriving community. And so there is joint interest there. I think you find what each other is good at, right? And those are the places for investment. So Yale needs to make a significant annual payment to the city. It's not a gift, it's not a contribution, it's their payment to the city for that is what they need to be paying because they are taking up a lot of space in this city and costing and using services. Yale additionally needs to figure out jointly with the city, figure out what are those places where Yale is best positioned. And I think economic growth, and thinking about the way in which the university is growing and the way in which the university's growth spins off things that should be creating wealth in our community, not at the expense of our community, not by pushing out our community, but things that are actually going to allow growth. So I think holding Yale to its accountability around hiring locally, absolutely. Community pressure needs to continue on that, and good government needs to be holding the university accountable. Thinking about the ways in which the university can create other jobs, so through the economic growth and investments that it makes is another place for partnership. Education is potentially another place for a partnership. I think we identify those, and then I think we stay at the table and know what I think I bring to the negotiating table is a good grounding in government and what government does and does not do well, and a good grounding in partnership. You know, we have totally transformed at Elm City Communities our portfolio, and we have done that by using public dollar, by using that public dollar to leverage, usually at the 3-to-1, sometimes as much as 9-to-1, public to private dollar leverage. We know how to do public-private partnership. We know how to do it well and do it in ways that creates real opportunity for our families. And I think we would bring that same approach to how to keep the university at the table. But ultimately, we need a long-term and sustainable partnership, not something that's a year-to-year kind of negotiation.
Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about policing. You touched on some of the problematic issues when it comes to the New Haven Police Department, and I want to dig in a little deeper. I think I have a somewhat accurate count, but I'm not sure it's exactly right. If I'm not mistaken, there have been about 13 murders in New Haven so far this year. You mentioned already the rising trends in terms of violent crimes and property crimes. And at the same time, we're dealing with a police department that until recently was pretty unapologetic about flaunting its Blue Lives Matter memorabilia. And it seems like some of our police officers are going rogue and acting with impunity. And I'll mention two things that I have found particularly disturbing. The rape of sex workers by a police officer, and more recently, the harassment of an undocumented immigrant woman by another police officer. It leads me to the conclusion that policing, community policing for all intents and purposes is dead in New Haven. I'm curious to know what your take is and what you would do in your first 100 days in office around the policing front.
Yeah. Now, the items that you're raising are heartbreaking, and that we are at 13 murders in our city at this point, not even midway through the year, is something that we should all be crying out about. You know, as a mom, some of the hardest moments I have had has been comforting my sons as they have lost a classmate, a teammate, friends to gun violence in our community. You know, I feel this so urgently and so painfully around what's happening. And what's also so troubling to me is that we know what works. And so if we are not implementing what works around gun violence and the rise in crime, then that's a failure of leadership. So one is a reset around leadership. We have to have the right leaders in the right areas in this community. We have to be really clear in this community about what we want police to be engaged in and what we don't. And where we want police engaged, what we think should be a 911 call and a response from a uniformed officer, then we need to have real clarity around what the rules of engagement are, what the use of force policies are, and there has got to be accountability for bad behavior. And that is everything from the language that's used to the choice of weapon and tool that's used in folks. When your behavior conveys your sense of this community, and we have too many instances where we hear the body camera footage that shows that there's a lack of respect for the community. So we need to do that. It's issues of recruitment. Who are we recruiting? One of our education platforms is about creating that pipeline of people into public safety careers, because unless we are hiring folks who have a love of and a knowledge of this community, it is very difficult to train love It's very difficult to reshape it, so we have to do that. I mentioned we got to close cases. We have to reestablish a sense that these things matter, that the same urgency, that we will bring the same urgency to solving every homicide, every major crime in this that we see for certain crimes. We have to do that in our community. But ultimately, if we're going to address the property crimes to the major crimes, we have got to be investing in the root causes, so education, ensuring that every one of our young people graduates ready for something that will pay them a livable wage in a way that they can, or ability to make a livable wage. We've got to be investing in that. We have got to have job opportunities and workforce development opportunities and access to safe and decent housing for families if we're really going to get to the root causes of crime in this community.
Thank you for that. And I'm just realizing we're almost at the end of the show. It goes by so fast. I feel like I could keep talking and asking you questions for the next hour. But Karen, we have a tradition in this show where we end with questions of our guests. So as we wrap up, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, and it's pretty rapid fire, so you don't have to think much about your answer.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. If you could spend a weekend with anyone in the world, who would it be, living or dead? Who would it be and why?
Oh, Ella Baker. Ella Baker is my hero, a heroine of the civil rights movement. And her grassroots and consensus building leadership is something that speaks deeply to me. So it'd be Ella Baker.
Cool. If you could wave a magic wand and make one social justice dream come true, what would it be?
Oh, I would end racism and anti-Blackness, which I see at the root of many of society's ills, if not all.
Yeah. What is your source of inspiration?
I'm inspired by my parents and my children. My parents inspire me by the sacrifices and the work that they did and the model that they left for me. And my young people inspire me. My two sons inspire me in just their creativity, their willingness to blaze their own path, and their real clear eye on what's right and what's equitable, and sort of unflinching unrelentingness around that.
Are they knocking on doors with you?
You know they are.
That's awesome. Folks, that unfortunately brings us to the end of our show. Thank you for listening. Karen, thanks for being on the show. This is a lot of fun. Until the next one, here is wishing everybody who's listening and wishing you, Karen, justice and many, many days of sunshine.
This is Harry Droz, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven.